Isa ka ba sa mga taong mahilig sa libro para gamiting pampatulog? O di kaya na may paulit-ulit mo nang binasa ang chapter 1 but you're like, huh? Ano yun? Hindi ko pa rin magets. Good news! Your boy Chika is here to help. Hello guys! My name is Rutherford. In this channel, I combine education and entertainment to bridge the gap between psychology and non-professionals, making it easily digestible and understandable without prior training needed. Welcome to RPM. Reading is very important. That's it. De, joke lang. You know, hindi naman lahat sa atin mahilig magbasa. Hindi rin lahat marunong mag-analyze ng libro. In this segment, I will share with you my personal techniques and experiences in analyzing the books that I used for the board exam. This is what this segment is all about. So, ready na ba kayo? Let the class begin! Ang unang step dyan, kasi karamihan sa atin, kasi pagbukas mo ng libro, kasi tinuruan tayo nung elementary, di ba? Page 1 muna, and then page 2. Mali yun! Kapag nagbakasa ka ng academic text, especially for the board exam, mali yun, no? So, let me further elaborate. Tingnan natin itong picture na to. So, makikita mo dito, may figure ng Lego, and may Christmas tree. But then you don't really know what it is. Right? Like, ano ba to? What is this picture all about? And that's what happens when you start with page 1. You start with a single part of the text that does not describe the full picture. So, the idea is that to start with the big picture using the summaries. So, pag nagbukas ka ng libro mo, you start with the summaries so that it looks like this. Ayan. So, nagsisimula ka na ngayon sa big picture. So, nakikita mo na where the author is getting at. You know, ano yung main ideas? Kasi doon nilalagay sa summaries is what are the important points that the author thinks the reader must know. Otherwise, it's poorly written, no? Kung hindi yun included sa summary, the summary was poorly written. Feist and Feist, if you read your TOP, it's one of the most reader-friendly book that I've ever seen in terms of helping students understand what they are trying to say. Ngayon, as a reader, the job of reading is basically you're reconstructing the picture. So basically, kung itong Lego na to, na nakikita mo, yung bata and my Christmas tree, what your job is to reconstruct that. Because that's the author's thoughts. So you start off with something like this. Ayan. In short, wala, no? You don't know what the author thinks yet, and you start with the raw materials. And your objective is this. Right? So makikita mo, copy siya nung thoughts nung author. Basically, you can say it's well read when you can reproduce what the author has thought. But we must not stop there. Because as readers, we are part of building knowledge. So, meron ka ring mga baon na sarili mong bricks. Maybe may nabasa kang ibang text, or may personal experiences ka. So, para mas matandaan mo siya, you need to transform that knowledge. That's what we call knowledge transformation. Now, let's see how this works out. Now, let me open and share to you Chapter 2 by Feist and Feist, and we will do a certain section where we will be reading it and we will be trying to analyze and figure out what the author is trying to say. So, as I said earlier, we must begin with the big picture. You have to know where it's coming from. So you don't start with page 1. You actually start at the end of the chapter. Here. So, makikita mo dito, andito na yung key terms and concepts na na-discuss throughout the chapter. So, we have the levels of mental life. And then, na-define na rin dito yung unconscious, preconscious, and conscious. And then, we have the provinces of the mind, ego, superego. And then, we have the dynamics, which are the aggression and sex. And then we have the defense mechanisms. And then the Freudian development and therapy, right? So, lahat yan, dapat alam mo. Right? That's the goal. Like, if you read the chapter, you'll see the summary, that's what the author is getting at. So, the first thing you do is you go back to the beginning page. So, makikita mo dito, meron ng structure na nakaset up si Feist and Feist. That's important because that's a source of review for you. Let's say tapos mo nang basahin yung chapter and then nabasa mo na yung summary, you should be able to say na what is unconscious, what is pre-conscious, what is conscious. Dynamics, sex, and aggression are they different. Ganun, so you keep on comparing because you're working within the framework of the text. And then after that, after mo basahin chapter, maybe i-relate mo siya kay Hume, kay Adler, kay Klein. But first, you have to understand the chapter in and of itself. Now, skip ko na yung biography because it's not the most pertinent. Let's try to do a reading of the overview. First, in-introduce dito ng author, makikita mo dito sa mark na to is that psychoanalysis, the most famous of all personality theories. So, makikita agad natin dito na Freud was the originator of psychoanalysis. Yun yung introduce. And then, here the second point is what makes Freud's theory so interesting. So, I marked this one because I'm marking the main ideas of the paragraph. You should be able to recognize the main ideas. Kasi, doon umiikot yung paragraph. So, imagine mo sa basketball, ang goal is to actually score the ball to the ring. Right? So, yun yung main idea. That's like the main idea of a paragraph. And every move na makikita mo sa basketball, it will make sense in the context na the players are trying to shoot the ball to the hoop. In this case, the author is creating the paragraph trying to elaborate on the main ideas. So, that's the first thing, no? Let's mark the main ideas. So, ayan, minark ko siya, and then minark ko rin yung sunod na paragraph. And then, I have some notes here. You see, I've pointed out that the evidence Freud used for psychoanalytic theory, ibig sabihin dito sa overview pa lang, pinapakita na ng author yung possible limitations ng theory. And it will be more understandable as you go along with the book kung bakit importante na alam natin yung limits ng theory. And then, okay, so tapos na tayo. And then, of course, na-establish na natin yung overview. And then, ganun din dito, nakikita mo, ito yung mga naging limits ng Freudian theory. So, ang most talagang limits niya is yung methodology niya. Nagsimula siya lagi sa hypothesis and then he just asserted his authority. And then, may liit yung sample size ng patients and mostly upper and middle classes. So, you should be alarmed, no? Kasi si Adler, ang mga naging patient niya is lower to middle classes. Kung magkaiba silang naging conclusion, so it's important because the data you're working on would determine the kinds of conclusion and interpretations you might make. Pero we're not here to evaluate the text and the theory. We're here to analyze the text. So let's proceed with that. Simulan natin sa analysis ng levels of mental life. This is the part where after na siya ng biography. Freud's greatest contribution to personality theory is his exploration of the unconscious and his insistence that people are motivated primarily by drives of which they have little or no awareness. To Freud, mental life is divided into two levels, the unconscious and conscious, and the unconscious and the conscious. So makikita mo dito, typical structure siya ni Feist and Feist is kapag nagsimula na siya sa isang major heading, this is a major heading, levels of mental life, and then these are the subheadings. So the major heading would tell you the overview of that section. So ngayon, sinasabi lang niya dito na a major argument ni Freud is the unconscious, the preconscious, and the conscious. And what will we be doing is we will be going to discuss that. So yun lang, primer siya na okay, this is what we will cover in this heading. And then nakikita mo may subheading which is the unconscious. And then again, I marked the main ideas. Ayan. And the green ones, they are the elaborations. So if you want to review, you want to focus on the main ideas of the paragraph. So for instance, dito, pagpasok pa lang, unconscious, dinefine niya agad. The unconscious contains all of those drives, urges, or instincts that are beyond our awareness, but that nevertheless motivate most of our words, feelings, and actions. So yun, mark that kasi definitions, when you're studying TOP, you're learning a new language, you can't impose your own definitions kasi kunwari ego. We will be talking about ego later on and kapag dinefine mo yung ego as being prideful na mataas kasi ang ego mo tol, malilito ka talaga sa TOP. Because we have very, very different definitions of ego on each theorist. So, whenever you encounter a definition always mark that up and try to put that onto your notes. Then ito makita mo, for example, when you say an example, it's just the author elaborating on the main idea. And you see paragraph breaks. May paragraph breaks dito, no? When you see a paragraph break, please realize that it means the piece is being developed. What do we mean by the piece is being developed? It means the author will be talking about a new idea. A new idea, it's important. Kunwari, nabasa mo na tong paragraph na to, dinefine yung unconscious, binigyan ng example. Huwag kang mag-proceed dun sa sunod na paragraph unless you get this one. Because when people write scientific books, they start with the most basic idea and then proceed to more and more complex ones. That's how it is organized. You have to understand the fundamental ideas before you could understand the ones that follow afterwards. So, kung sa simula pa lang, paragraph 1 pa lang, hindi mo na na-gets, hindi mo binasa yung main idea, hindi mo na-gets kung paano in-elaborate ng author, basahin mo siya ulit. Don't rush. It's better that way kesa basahin mo siya ng isahan ng wala kang na-gets. Second, because the unconscious is not available to the conscious mind. How can one know if it really exists? You see a question agad, first sentence pa lang nung second paragraph. It shows na yun yung tanong na sinasagot nung paragraph. And actually, the preceding sentences, the sentences that follow that main idea, that answers this question. So, before you can proceed with this paragraph, dapat alam mo, okay, tinanong kita, how can one know if the unconscious really exists? Unconscious nga, di ba? Wala kang awareness. So, nakita mo dito, sinagot, we can prove that indirectly through the process of dreams, slips of the tongue, and repetition. And then, ganun ulit sa sunod. Unconscious processes. Again, nakikita mo, dun sa start pa lang, nung main heading, levels of mental life, sinabi na merong location and process. Ngayon, sa second paragraph, diniscuss na yung location ng unconscious. How do we know if it really exists? So, sa sunod na paragraph, we are talking now about the process. What is the unconscious process? How does it work? Makita mo dito, nakalagay sa notes ko, main idea. Note the word process important since the author said he or she will be discussing location and process. Also, notice the patterns. People don't just break the paragraphs. It means there's a new development in the piece. So, you should understand that each paragraph has one thought. That's the rule of good writing. That's why you made sa mga classes nyo, maybe sa college may mga writing classes. It's not just to make you write, no? It's also to make you good readers. Because if you know how to write, you know how to read, and that's how it works. One paragraph, one thought. And nakikita mo dito sa mga minort ko na sentences, these are the thoughts that the author are trying to connect. So we talked about the definition of the unconscious, now we talked about the location, and now we're talking about the process. Na unconscious processes, pumapasok siya sa atin, pero distorted and disguised na. And then the next paragraph, let's see here. So makikita mo may bold letters dito, the repression and suppression. Unfortunately, repression lang yung dinefine dito ni Fies and Fies. Binold letter nila yung suppression, they should have defined it. This is the first mention of the word suppression. They should have defined it, but they didn't. So, I leave that up to you, dear readers, to figure it out, what is suppression, and how is it different with repression. But pag may nakakita ka ng bold letters, be alarmed, you should be comparing. Again, lalo na pag magkalapit, suppression and repression, magkalapit sila sinabi sa isang sentence. What's the difference? Because you won't use different words if they mean the same thing. Kunwari, punishment and repression. And then repression. If it means the same, you would use the same words. But the author used different words. They have different meaning. Figure it out. Now, let's move on to the fourth paragraph. Now, not all unconscious processes, however, spring from repression of childhood events. Now, we are now talking about what are the limits, no? Ini-expand niya, dinevelop niya yung paragraph 3. It's trying to introduce another idea. It might seem na in-amplify niya yung third paragraph, but what it's actually doing is, dinevelop niya, may pinasok siyang bagong concept. And that is the phylogenetic endowment. So, sa paperback print ko, meron ako yan, this paragraph talks about phylogenetic endowment. So, the third paragraph talks about the process. The fourth paragraph talks about the limits of those process and phylogenetic endowment. And the rest of the sentences, again, umiikot lang dito sa main idea na ito. So, Freud's notion of phylogenetic endowment is quite similar to Jung's idea of collective unconscious. Aha! First mentioned ni Carl Jung and kinumpare siya sa collective unconscious. So, you must realize now, dapat maisip mo na, what's the difference between phylogenetic endowment and collective unconscious? And yun yung in-elaborate ng author. It's actually well written kasi as you read along yung mga naiisip mong tanong, nasasagot na niya. And then another, unconscious drives may appear in consciousness, but only after undergoing certain transformations. So it's quite the same with the third paragraph, right? But now it's talking about drives, unconscious drives. Aha, it's a new idea again. What's the difference now? What are those drives, right? So makikita mo dito, in-elaborate niya, sex or aggression. So nasa paragraph siya, in-elaborate ulit. And then, unconscious, of course, does not mean inactive or dormant. Now, ito na yung last paragraph ng heading. Dito na pumapasok yung main argument sa main heading natin na levels of mental life, that the unconscious are actually the one who motivate people. So that's it. Tapos ka na dun sa heading ng unconscious. So, naiintindihan mo na we talked about what is the definition of the unconscious, what's the process, what's the unconscious process, how do we know that the unconscious exists, what are the limits of these processes, like, what is phylogenetic endowment and how is it different from the collective unconscious. And the last one is, again, how does unconscious influence our behavior? How does it enter our consciousness? So, makikita mo dito, I marked it as red. Sinulat ko dito yung questions answered. What is the unconscious? How do we know it exists? How does the unconscious work? Why is the phylogenetic endowment important? What is the difference with Jung's collective unconscious? How does the unconscious drive appear in consciousness? And how does the unconscious motivate people? Now, the author answers all of this while providing examples. So, kung magre-review ka, you want to review this particular section only, you should be able to answer all those questions. Because that's what the author tried to answer. And that's what you should be trying to recreate is if you are trying to master the text. Again, may iba't ibang purpose. Pwede namang nag-trip-trip ka lang. Hindi mo naman kailangan maging ganito ka rigorous. But, if you're trying to become an expert, a professional, I highly recommend that you read it like this. Read actively. Try to figure out where the author is coming from. And again, next section is the preconscious. Same. Again, nakikita mo na dito yung pattern. Sa simula pa lang, dinidefine na niya yung preconscious. And then, dito, nag-elaborate na lang siya sa sources of the preconscious. So, again, kung maggagawa ka ng ganitong questions na tulad ng ginawa ko, what are the two sources of the preconscious? And then, you elaborate on that. So, that's it. That's for that section. And then, we talk about the conscious. Ganun din, same. Same lang. Again, ulitin mo lang yung ginawa natin kanina. And then, may ginawa dito, in summary. Always mark those in summary. Because it's not summarizing the whole text, it's summarizing the heading. And when it's saying summarizing the heading, it will tell you the relationship between the three subheadings. So, kunwari, levels of mental life. And then, binigyan ka na ng overview. Unconscious, preconscious, and conscious. And then, bawat heading, diniscuss na yung major ideas. Kunwari, sa unconscious, yung phylogenetic endowment, the process, why it exists, or how is it being defined, how does it act on a person, how does it manifest. And then, may preconscious, what are the sources of that? And then, the conscious again, how does that work? What are the sources of conscious awareness? And then, in summary, makikita mo dito, how does conscious, unconscious, and preconscious related to one another? And that's what it answers. So, makikita mo siya diyan kapag binasa mo itong text na to and tinignan mo itong diagram. And then, yun na. That's it. And then, you do that again to another heading, but then, it's much more complex. Why is that? As I said earlier, when you read a scientific text, you begin with the most fundamental ideas. So, gagawin mo lang yung ginawa natin kanina. But, you should always add the question. So, since we are talking about provinces of the mind, isipin mo, bakit kaya discuss nung author yung levels of mental life muna bago yung provinces of the mind? How are they related? Why do I need to understand the levels of mental life first before I can understand provinces of the mind? And it should appear on the text. And again, this is pretty well written. So, makikita mo na dyan, dito sa diagram na to, pinakita na yung relationship between conscious, unconscious, and preconscious, and ego, superego. And then you keep on doing and doing that until you understand every thought that the author made and you followed each one of that. And then hopefully sa notes mo, sinulat mo yung mga questions tulad ng ginawa ko sa kanina. Itong mga ganito. Sinulat mo yung mga questions. And then, you connect that. No? Connect it with other theories. After reading the chapter, you connect it with other theories. After connecting it with other theories, you try to answer it later on without looking at the book. And if you can do that, if you can answer all the questions you've generated as you've read, you can say that you have understood the chapter. So that's the reading, and I recommend that you read it twice, no? First, you read the summary, and then the structures, and then you did what we did, and then you mark first all the main ideas. Like, spend some time, don't read the entire text, don't read it word for word, but fish for the main ideas and mark them first. Milestone mo siya. It's like putting up a flag in a book that tells you that the progress you have made. So, for instance, minark mo isang main idea sa isang paragraph, and then nakita mo yung next mark mo, binabasa mo na yung next mark, right? And then hindi mo pa na-get yung previous paragraph, maybe nag-space out ka. So that tells you to go back. Go back and see how the author developed the idea. Right? If I tell you how to read a book, then that's the main idea, and then I elaborate on that. You have to figure out how I elaborated on that so that you further understand that. And then, again, you write the questions, and then when you review and study again, you try to connect it with the things that you already know. Hindi ka tabula rasa when you read. Kunwari, id. Right? It tells you it runs on the pleasure principle. Aba naman, never ka bang nagkaroon ng something na gustong-gusto mo talaga? Never mo ba na-experience na nagkikrave ka sa isang pagkain? Hindi ba function yun ng id? Or super ego, conscience and the ego ideal. Nagkaroon ka na ba ng moral transgressions? Have you ever felt guilt? If you ever felt guilt, then that's your super ego working on your ego. And have you ever felt inferior and feeling weak and insufficient and things like that, then that would be your ego ideal, telling you that you're not enough. That's the beauty of psychology, is that when you study human behavior, you're also studying yourself. So never forget that. Just as much that you have to figure out the questions and the answers of the text, you have to have your own questions and answers as well. Because that's how you learn. You have to make it relevant to you so that you remember it better. And of course, last but not least, nagawa mo na yung mga questions, nasagot mo na, na-connect mo na. Take a test from another person. Answer the drills. Find a way to test your knowledge in any way that you can. And then see if there are gaps. Kasi minsan akala mo alam mo na. That's the worst thing, no? Actually, pag magbo-board exam ka, that's the worst possible mindset. Na akala mo alam mo na lahat. You have to test it out. Ngayon pa lang, sa drills pa lang, alamin mo na yung mga hindi mo alam. Para, pag board exam, alam mo na sila. Hindi ka na magkakamali. And then you do that again. So, yung mga maganda dito sa process na to is, you actually remember it better. It's better than mnemonics, or it's better than reading the whole one thing at all. I find it better kasi naalala ko yung fundamental ideas ng mga binasa kong books in TOP, psych assessment. Although di ko na rin tatandaan detail per detail, I know the main ideas.
Sabi nga ni Mr. Johnson, a writer only begins a book. A reader finishes it. In short, it ends with you. When you take the time and the effort to transform what you have learned into your own thought system, into your own life. You have to take into account that while you are thinking about what the author thinks, you should also think about what you think.
That's it! I hope nakatulong ito sa mga babasahin ninyong libro. If you have any questions, suggestions, feedback, or anything in between, just send me an email. The detail is in the description box below. You can also subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified sa mga upcoming lectures, mock tests, and other exciting segments ng RPM. Oh, di pa tapos ang chika! Tandaan, iba ang tinitingnan sa tinititigan. Iba ang binabasa sa naiintindihan. Di ba mas maganda kapag ang binabasa mo, naiintindihan mo? Ang tanong, naiintindihan mo ba? ang binabasa mo. Thanks again for watching. This is Rutherford and hope to see you on my next RPM video. Class dismissed!